In the early hours of August 8th, 1963, while most of Britain slept peacefully, a crime unfolded that would shock the nation and rewrite criminal history forever. The countryside was silent. No traffic, no witnesses, only dark fields, distant trees, and a single railway line cutting through Buckinghamshire. At exactly 3:03 in the morning, a Royal Mail train traveling from Glasgow to London began to slow. The driver believed he was responding to a routine red signal ahead. He had no idea that the signal had been deliberately altered. He had no idea that masked men were waiting in the darkness. He stepped down from the cab to investigate. Seconds later, he was struck on the head with a metal bar. Postal workers inside the train were forced to lie face down on the floor. Communication lines were cut. A carriage packed with cash was uncoupled, and within less than half an hour, more than £2.5 million vanished into the night. It was the largest robbery Britain had ever seen. History would remember it as the Great Train Robbery. But behind the headlines was a deeper story, a story of ambition, of loyalty and betrayal, of men who believed they could outsmart an entire nation, and of how one careless mistake destroyed everything. Every great crime begins with an idea, and this one began with a quiet, intelligent man named Bruce Reynolds. Reynolds was not loud. He was not reckless. He was calm, methodical, and ambitious. He had spent years moving through London's criminal underworld, learning how jobs were planned, how police investigated, and most importantly, how criminals failed. But Reynolds wanted something different. He didn't want small robberies. He didn't want constant fear of arrest. He wanted one perfect operation, one final job that would set him free forever. The opportunity came through whispers and contacts. Reynolds learned that every night a Royal Mail train carried enormous amounts of cash from Scotland to London. Money collected from banks, businesses, and weekend deposits. Millions of pounds transported with surprisingly little security. No armed guards, no armored vehicles, just postal workers and routine. To Reynolds, it was irresistible. He began building a team. Not amateurs, professionals. Each man selected for a specific skill: drivers, burglars, logistics experts. Among them was a loud and impulsive character who would later become famous worldwide: Ronnie Biggs. Biggs wasn't the mastermind, but he helped recruit people and organize logistics. His personality would later bring enormous attention to the case. The gang met in quiet pubs and rented flats, never all together, never drawing attention. Reynolds insisted on strict rules. No talking, not to girlfriends, not to friends, not even to family, because one careless word could destroy everything. For months, they studied railway schedules. They followed the train's route. They timed stops. They observed shift changes. They learned how signals worked. Eventually, they selected a remote location near Bridego Bridge. It was perfect: isolated countryside, few access roads, natural cover, enough space to hide vehicles. They recruited a former railway worker who knew how to manipulate signals. They rehearsed separating carriages. They practiced loading heavy sacks into vehicles. Every movement was timed, every role assigned. They weren't just planning a robbery. They were choreographing a performance. Still, they understood the risks. If caught, they faced decades in prison. If something went wrong, someone could be killed. But confidence is dangerous, and preparation can create an illusion of invincibility. They believed they had thought of everything. On the night of August 8th, they took their positions. Vehicles waited hidden in fields. Masks were checked, tools prepared. No speeches, no dramatic countdown, just quiet nods. When the train approached, the altered signal forced it to stop. The driver stepped down. He was attacked. Inside the train, workers were forced to the floor. Communication cables were cut. The cash carriage was uncoupled and moved beneath the bridge. Then the real work began. 120 sacks of money, each weighing nearly 100 pounds, over 2 tons of cash. They carried bag after bag into waiting Land Rovers. Sweat poured, hands shook, engines idled softly. The entire operation lasted less than 30 minutes. No alarms, no gunfire. Then they disappeared into the darkness. They regrouped later at a remote farmhouse, exhausted but euphoric. They laid the money on tables. They drank, they laughed, they counted stacks of notes. They believed they had won. But this celebration would become their undoing. Instead of immediately fleeing, they stayed. They cooked meals, they smoked, they played board games using real banknotes. They left fingerprints on cups, plates, and furniture. They had executed the robbery perfectly, but failed at the escape. And that single decision would cost them everything. Within days, police received a tip about the abandoned farmhouse. When investigators entered, they were stunned. Dirty dishes, unmade beds, food left on tables, and fingerprints everywhere. Forensic teams worked tirelessly. Prints were matched to known criminals. Names appeared. Surveillance began. One by one, gang members were arrested, some quietly, others dramatically. Courtrooms filled with families watching loved ones led away in handcuffs. Judges handed down long sentences, 20 years, 30 years. Lives were shattered. While some members managed to flee overseas, most did not escape justice. The stolen money began disappearing. Some buried, some spent, some lost through reckless living. What was meant to bring freedom instead brought fear and regret. 2 years later, one convicted member shocked the world by escaping from prison. Using a rope ladder made from bedding, he climbed through a window and dropped onto a waiting van. He fled Europe, then settled in Brazil. Due to legal loopholes at the time, he could not be extradited. For decades, he lived openly. He gave interviews, posed for photographs, turned his crime into fame. Tourists visited him. Journalists followed him. He became a strange celebrity. Meanwhile, many of the others struggled quietly. Some fell into addiction. Some battled depression. Some died broke. Families were destroyed. Children grew up without fathers. The dream of freedom had turned into isolation. The robbery forced major changes in British security. Cash transport procedures were rewritten. Rail systems were upgraded. Police invested heavily in forensic science. The crime had reshaped how Britain fought organized theft. From the outside, the Great Train Robbery looks clever, almost cinematic. But beneath the headlines lies a harder truth. People were injured, lives were wasted, years disappeared behind prison walls. The criminals did not win, they merely survived. And survival is not success. For a brief moment, a group of ordinary men believed they had beaten society. They fooled railway systems. They escaped with millions. But they could not outrun time. They could not erase fingerprints. They could not escape consequences. Because crime does not end when the money is taken. It ends when the truth catches up. And it always does. The Great Train Robbery remains famous not because it succeeded, but because it reminds us how fragile even the smartest plans can be. That greed clouds judgment, that comfort breeds mistakes, and that freedom gained through crime is only an illusion. In the end, the money faded, the fame disappeared. What remained were broken families, lost years, and silent regrets. And so this story stands as a warning across generations. No matter how clever the plan, no matter how perfect the execution, every crime carries its own shadow. And eventually, that shadow catches up. Thank you for watching. If you found this story powerful, remember to like, subscribe, and share. And join us again as we uncover more true stories from the shadows of history. Until next time.